The nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl in Ukraine was 30 years ago, but the crisis is still with us today. That's because radiation virtually never dies.
Deep within the core of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, where human entry is forbidden for reasons of survival, a hidden network of cameras was activated. What they recorded was not the stillness of death, but something far more disturbing. The monochrome footage reveals glowing eyes cutting through the darkness, predators moving with confidence across a poisoned landscape, and biological behavior that contradicts every rule of modern medicine. In a place where ionizing radiation is powerful enough to tear apart the structure of DNA, life has not faded away. Instead, it is rising, evolving at a pace that defies belief. This is the story of what is truly happening behind the barbed wire fences of Chernobyl, where nature has begun to rewrite the laws of survival without asking permission from humanity. The legacy of death. First, we must return to the night the catastrophe unfolded. At 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986, in northern Ukraine, a catastrophic steam explosion tore through Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The blast ripped apart a protective roof weighing more than 1,000 tons and exposed the burning nuclear core directly to the atmosphere. A column of fire laden with lethal radioactive particles surged into the night sky, giving birth to a silent cloud of death that drifted steadily across Europe. In the first hours, residents of the nearby town of Pripyat remained asleep or stood on their balconies, watching the strange blaze shimmer in brilliant colors. They had no idea that the air they were breathing was already poisoned at the cellular level. When the sun rose, the brutal reality began to reveal itself. Radiation levels around the plant were so extreme that even military-grade measuring instruments of the era became saturated and shut down. The evacuation that followed was a rushed and heartbreaking exodus. More than 49,000 people were ordered to leave their homes immediately, abandoning their possessions, their memories, and their lives. They were told it would be temporary. Just 3 days. Those 3 days stretched into 4 decades. Pripyat became a ghost city, a settlement frozen in time, with dolls left on beds, half-eaten meals still on tables, and classrooms where books remained open as if waiting for students who would never return. To prevent the disaster from escalating further, an unprecedented cleanup operation was launched. More than 600,000 people, known as liquidators, were mobilized. Among them, the story of 3 volunteer divers became legend. Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov entered the flooded chambers beneath the reactor, where radiation levels were high enough to be fatal within minutes. Their mission was to open critical valves and prevent a second steam explosion that could have devastated half of Europe. In the aftermath, a massive structure of concrete and steel, known as the sarcophagus, was hastily constructed over the destroyed reactor. Its sole purpose was to seal the radioactive monster inside and isolate the source of contamination from the outside world. An exclusion zone covering roughly 2,600 square kilometers was established, encircled by barbed wire fences, military checkpoints, and warning signs signaling mortal danger. The outside world breathed a sigh of relief. Scientists, politicians, and the public believed the problem had been solved. Chernobyl was contained. It was labeled a dead land, a concrete tomb where life could not exist and was not allowed to exist. The prevailing assumption was that any organism left inside the perimeter would slowly perish from disease, genetic mutation, and organ failure. Humans had withdrawn, and the area was presumed to sink into an eternal silence of destruction. Yet, as the iron gates closed and the last guards retreated to checkpoints along the outer edge, an unsettling truth began to take shape. We believed we had locked the catastrophe away, but no one truly knew what was happening in the absolute darkness of that abandoned land. The absence of humans was a prerequisite for safety. But it also meant that we had surrendered our eyes, leaving whatever moved within the zone unseen and unmonitored. Shadows in the Red Forest. Even after humanity withdrew, nature at Chernobyl faced the direct shock of the explosion. The area most severely affected lay immediately west of the power plant, a pine forest spanning roughly 10 square kilometers after the blast. A radioactive dust cloud saturated with cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium swept through the forest like a toxic storm. The consequences were immediate and devastating. In a single night, thousands of healthy green pines turned a scorched ginger and reddish brown, then died standing upright. The area soon became known as the Red Forest. Radiation levels here were so extreme that not only did the trees die, but natural decomposition itself was halted. The microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi responsible for breaking down dead wood were also destroyed by radiation. The crimson trunks remained upright, like skeletal remains, refusing to rot, creating a landscape that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. According to conventional scientific logic, the Red Forest and its surroundings should have become a true biological desert. Ionizing radiation at such levels destroys DNA, prevents cell division, and causes mass death in any organism that ventures near. Ecological models of the time predicted a catastrophic collapse in biodiversity, requiring centuries or even millennia to recover to even the most basic levels. But as time passed, fragmented and difficult to verify, reports began to emerge from border guards, and a small number of scientists permitted access to the safer outer zones. They did not speak of silence. Instead, they spoke of sounds, leaves rustling without wind, unfamiliar footprints pressed into radioactive soil, and dark shapes slipping across the cracked streets of Pripyat at dusk. Some researchers who ventured deeper into the buffer zone recorded strange botanical phenomena. Vegetation had not vanished as expected. Instead, plants began to regrow in distorted forms, with twisted branches and warped leaves, yet remaining suspiciously green and vigorous. It appeared that plant life was attempting to adapt to the toxic environment rather than surrender to it. More troubling still were the signs of animals. Bones of wildlife were found scattered across the land, but not in numbers that matched the predicted scale of death. Radiation detectors continued to crackle wildly near the ground, confirming that the environment remained an invisible death trap. Yet the physical evidence told a different story. Fresh animal droppings, claw marks on tree trunks, and newly dug burrows indicated active biological life unfolding in what was supposed to be the epicenter of death. This contradiction created a deep fracture in the narrative of the dead zone. If radiation remained lethal, why were signs of life not only persisting, but becoming increasingly visible? Were the instruments wrong? Or were we confronting a biological phenomenon that lay beyond textbook understanding? The presence of movement within the Red Forest was not merely an anomaly. It was a direct challenge to the laws of radiological toxicity that humanity had long trusted. The eye inside the exclusion zone. To unravel the mysteries shrouding the Red Forest and its surrounding lands, distant observation through satellites or binoculars was not enough. What was required was direct vision, a deliberate penetration into the very heart of this cursed terrain. An international team of scientists, including specialists from the University of Georgia and several ecological research institutions, chose to pursue a bold and unprecedented project. Their objective was to establish a surveillance network unlike anything attempted before. Positioned within the most dangerous sectors of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, human observers were ruled out entirely, as the risk of prolonged radiation exposure was simply too great. Instead, the team turned to technology. They deployed automated wildlife camera traps, electronic sentinels designed to watch without suffering. The research team, led by Dr. James Beasley, operated under extreme conditions, wearing specialized protective suits, carrying personal radiation dosimeters, and moving swiftly through areas where radiation levels fluctuated unpredictably. They installed a total of 42 cameras at carefully calculated strategic locations. Some were placed deep within dense forest. Others were positioned along contaminated riverbanks. Several were mounted near the crumbling apartment blocks of Pripyat and even close to the reactor site itself. The installation process unfolded in an atmosphere of constant tension. Every step had to be calculated to avoid radiation hotspots, places where tiny fragments of nuclear fuel could be hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves. The forest lay in absolute silence, broken only by the frantic clicking of Geiger counters and the labored breathing of scientists behind gas masks. Each camera was meticulously camouflaged against tree trunks and equipped with motion sensors and infrared capability, allowing it to record day and night to ensure that no species went unnoticed. The researchers placed scent-based lures at the camera stations to attract carnivores and omnivores toward the lenses. The team's initial hypothesis was cautious and tinged with pessimism. They prepared themselves to document sparse and unhealthy animal populations, creatures bearing visible tumors or congenital deformities caused by generations of radiation exposure. Their primary aim was to record the slow collapse of an ecosystem and produce evidence of the long-term consequences of nuclear contamination. Once the system was activated, the team withdrew, leaving these electronic eyes standing alone amid the poisoned wilderness. Time passed, and memory cards inside the cameras began to fill. The scientists waited in a state of uneasy anticipation. The data would provide a definitive answer to debates that had persisted for decades. But when the first images were retrieved and displayed on computer screens, the atmosphere in the laboratory was not one of grim confirmation. It was a silence born of shock. What they saw aligned with none of the predictive models. These were not merely photographs of animals. They were evidence of a phenomenon that challenged humanity's understanding of life, survival, and death itself. The paradox of survival. Instead of sickly creatures dragging themselves toward extinction, the screens revealed an explosion of wildlife, vibrant and astonishingly robust. Footage from the 42 cameras painted a panoramic portrait of an ecosystem that had not collapsed at all, but appeared to be thriving more vigorously than many protected nature reserves across Europe. The first to appear were large hoofed animals, herds of wild boar, well-fed and powerful, were recorded rooting through soil that radiation instruments still marked as critically dangerous. Deer with massive antlers wandered calmly between the abandoned apartment buildings of Pripyat. Their numbers were so high that researchers initially questioned whether the cameras were malfunctioning and replaying the same footage. True astonishment followed with the return of rare and powerful species. The cameras captured images of Przewalski's horse, an exceptionally rare wild horse once on the brink of extinction. These animals were not merely surviving, they were reproducing, with foals running freely across grasslands that had overtaken former nuclear waste sites. Even more shocking was the emergence of apex predators, the Eurasian lynx, a species known for its elusiveness and sensitivity to human disturbance, had vanished from the region long before the disaster due to human activity. Now it stared directly into the camera lens with unblinking eyes, marking territory atop the roofs of old concrete shelters. Then came a heavier presence, stepping slowly from the undergrowth, the European brown bear. For the first time in more than a century, brown bears were confirmed to have returned to this land. Their presence was the clearest signal that the ecosystem had recovered enough to support animals with immense territorial and dietary demands. Most striking of all was the gray wolf population. Wolves in the Chernobyl zone were recorded at densities up to 7 times higher than those in nearby uncontaminated nature reserves. They moved in large packs, hunted efficiently, and dominated the top of the food chain. This paradox overturned conventional logic. Why? in a place where humans could not survive more than a few days without protection. Were animals flourishing so dramatically? Was radiation less dangerous than we believed? The measurements said otherwise. Radiation levels remained lethally toxic. This led to a far more unsettling conclusion. The absence of humans appeared to benefit nature more profoundly than nuclear radiation harmed it. Yet the mystery did not end with rising numbers. The ability of these animals to survive chronic radiation exposure without population decline suggested something deeper was occurring within their bodies. They were not simply avoiding danger zones. GPS data showed that many species routinely traveled through and lived within radiation hotspots. This was not a chance. It was a biological mechanism never before observed, and one that science has only begun to confront. The altered genetic code. To fully understand this seemingly irrational mechanism of survival, images alone were no longer sufficient. Researchers had to descend to the molecular level. A research team led by evolutionary biologist Kara Love from Princeton University began collecting blood samples and fitting GPS collars equipped with radiation dose sensors onto wolves living within Chernobyl. The goal was to determine how much radiation these wolves absorbed and how their bodies responded. Data from the collars revealed that the animals were exposed to radiation levels reaching 11.28 millirem per day throughout their lives. This was 6 times higher than the permitted limit for a human worker in a nuclear environment. At such exposure levels, the immune system of a typical animal would be severely compromised, leading to cancer and premature death. Yet when Kara Love and her team analyzed the genomes of the Chernobyl wolves, they uncovered a startling truth. Their immune systems had changed. They no longer resembled those of wolves elsewhere, but instead showed similarities to the immune responses observed in cancer patients undergoing radiation therapy. The difference was profound, rather than collapsing. The wolves' genetic makeup had developed specialized regions capable of resisting, or at least tolerating, elevated rates of cellular mutation. In other words, these wolves were evolving, and they were doing so at an astonishing pace. A process known as forced evolution. Natural selection pressure at Chernobyl was thousands of times harsher than in normal environments. Weaker individuals, unable to repair radiation-damaged DNA, had long since perished. Only those carrying rare and beneficial random mutations survived and passed those traits on to the next generation. The Tree Project and related studies identified similar patterns in amphibians. Tree frogs living in the red forest had shifted from bright green to deep black. The melanin pigment in their skin functioned as a radiation shield, an adaptation that occurred in fewer than 20 generations, a mere blink in evolutionary time. These findings overturned our understanding completely. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone was not a dead land where life clung passively to survival. It had become a vast and brutal biological laboratory, where radiation acted as a driving force, compelling organisms to rewrite their genetic identity in order to endure. The creatures captured on camera were no longer the wolves, frogs, or trees of 40 years ago. They were altered versions, genetic variants carrying codes fundamentally different from their counterparts beyond the zone. The poisoned circulatory system. Genetic changes in wolves and shifts in frog pigmentation were only the surface of a much deeper process. As scientists expanded their investigations, they realized that these adaptations were not isolated events. They were the result of an entirely new ecosystem operating on the very toxin that once destroyed it. Rivers and lakes throughout the region, especially the cooling pond of the former power plant, functioned as circulatory arteries, transporting radiation through the body of this ecosystem. Radioactive material seeped from the soil into the water and was absorbed by aquatic plants and plankton. Fish, particularly the massive catfish inhabiting the cooling pond, accumulated high concentrations of radioactive nuclides within their muscle tissue. These fish then became prey for otters, white-tailed eagles, and the returning brown bears, as these animals moved, fed, excreted, or eventually died and decomposed. They dispersed concentrated radiation throughout the forest, creating mobile radiation hotspots. A study using unmanned aerial vehicles combined with LiDAR scanning and gamma spectroscopy revealed that the radiation map of Chernobyl was not static. It shifted and flowed, tracing the movements of living organisms, elements such as cesium-137, with a half-life of 30 years, and plutonium-239, which persists for up to 24,000 years, did not remain buried as once assumed. They circulated within the bloodstream of a closed ecosystem. This was a toxic yet stable nutrient cycle. Wildlife was not merely coexisting with radiation. It was consuming it, drinking it, and recycling it. This reality introduced a new and largely unconsidered risk. The exclusion zone was no longer simply a prison containing radiation. It had become a self-sustaining living entity, a massive biological reactor. Barbed wire fences now carried an entirely different meaning. They did not only keep humans out, but also separated a profoundly altered ecosystem from the outside world. If wolves carrying these mutations migrated outward and bred with normal populations, or if this toxic nutrient cycle expanded beyond its boundaries, the biological consequences would be impossible to predict. Humanity was powerless to intervene. We cannot cleanse radiation from millions of tons of living biomass that continues to grow and reproduce. All we can do is observe from a distance, through sensors and camera lenses, witnessing a world governed by rules we inadvertently unleashed and can no longer control. The post-human era, as night falls over Chernobyl, and infrared cameras continue to record the steady movements of a dense and thriving forest. The answer to the final question becomes clear. We asked how life could survive in the most dangerous place on Earth. The answer lies not in miracles, but in the ruthless resilience of nature. Chernobyl delivered a bitter lesson in humility. We often believe that nature is fragile and dependent on human protection. The reality at Chernobyl proves the opposite. Nature does not need us. It only needs us to disappear. Even when we leave behind the deepest nuclear scar imaginable, nature will still find a way to heal, or at least to endure around that wound. But this healing does not restore the past. It evolves into something new. The organisms of Chernobyl are pioneers of a new biological era, a post-human age. They demonstrate that life can bend its own genetic structure to adapt to our worst mistakes. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is no longer a relic of history. It is a simulation of Earth's future should humanity vanish after a global catastrophe. A world that is green, dense, and overflowing with life, yet saturated with radiation and irreversible genetic change. In the final frame, a wolf pauses before the camera. Its eyes glow as it stares directly at us through the screen. There is no fear in its gaze, no plea for mercy. It is the look of a creature belonging to another world, a world where humans are outsiders and our old rules of survival no longer apply. We created hell, but life turned it into a home, and the door to that home has closed forever behind us.